tell you about NATO. It's obsolete, and we're paying too much money. I said it was obsolete. It's no longer obsolete.
Whiplash in Washington after a week of changing positions at the White House. Joining me now, Joe Watkins, Republican strategist and White House aide to President George H.W. Bush. Rick Tyler, former Cruz campaign spokesman. He's an MSNBC political analyst. And Zerlina Maxwell, former director of progressive media for the Clinton campaign, and she is now the director of progressive programming for Sirius XM. Thank the three of you for being here. This is great today.
Good morning.
Thanks, Joe, I want to start with you because are these flip-flops or are these evolutions?
Well, some would call them flip-flops, others would call it evolution. I mean, this is the reality of the White House. Donald Trump is not an ideologue, first of all. He's not somebody who's tied to an ideology. He is somebody who is tied to practical politics and he's a pragmatist for the most part. So he'll do whatever he needs to do, and that's what he's doing. So yeah, he's flip-flopped. He's changed his stance on a whole host of issues as now that he's president of the United States and he sees what the job entails and he sees what's needed to move America forward. Yeah, he's changed his position on NATO, on China as a currency manipulator, on a whole host of issues. And this may not be the end of it either.
And Rick, if these policies are so flip-floppable or changeable, could that imply that there's really not much thought being put into them?
Maybe. I think this is more of reality hitting the reality star. He's definitely taken on the more conventional view of presidents. You can see it in the personnel changes that he's had. He's listening to different voices than he was on the campaign. But most of these positions that he's moved toward, I would agree with, and so it's a good flip-flop.
Okay, Zerlina, I want to toss this to you because there's an article on the Hill that has this headline: surprise, now the establishment is praising Trump. But many of his supporters like the isolationism that he spoke about on the campaign trail. So what happens to his supporters now?
I think that's a very good question. I mean, he's already at, around 40% in terms of his approval rating. So that base that is so loyal to Donald Trump is shrinking and shrinking. And as he moderates on some of these positions, which I think is a good thing. But I'm old enough to remember when flip-flopping was, the ultimate death knell to a particular candidate, then John Kerry in 2004. So it's interesting that Republicans now are supporting shifting on positions to as more facts and more knowledge about the issue come out. But I think with President Trump, the real issue is that he doesn't really have a full grasp on the nuance of many of these issues. And so, of course, he's going to be shifting on these serious issues because he essentially takes the opinion of the last person he spoke to about that particular topic, and he comes out and sort of repeats what they said. But that is really worrying because we need somebody in the commander-in-chief who actually has an understanding of policy, and Donald Trump didn't demonstrate that in the campaign, and he hasn't demonstrated that in what is a little under 100 days. We're coming up on 100 days very shortly.
And Zerlina, we also saw lots of reporting this week about the future of the chief strategist Steve Bannon, the president calling him, quote, a guy who works for me. What's your takeaway from hearing that?
That Steve Bannon might want to clear out his desk or get it ready to leave quickly. Because essentially when the president is pretending as if he doesn't really know the person, we saw that with Michael Flynn, we're seeing that with Paul Manafort as more information is coming out about his second campaign chairman and his ties to Russia. And I think that when the president doesn't confidently support you in public and in the press, when he did the New York Post interview and essentially was like, well, I don't know, Steve, that definitely was a warning sign if you're a Steve Bannon supporter or a core Trump supporter who agrees with many of the things that Steve Bannon has put forward in terms of policy in this administration.
And Rick, how do you read this split in the White House with Steve Bannon?
Well, look, Donald Trump has given more and more to Jared Kushner, which may or may not be concerning. And with Steve Bannon, he essentially, he threw him under the bus. People are now seeing Steve Bannon in the hallway and walking in the other direction. They don't want to be seen with him. And the reason is when Donald Trump says, I'm my own strategist, and Steve Bannon's title is senior strategist, there's really not a reason for him. So for all intents and purposes, I think he's been let go. Whether he recognizes it or not remains to be seen.
Hey, Joe, quick question here. Did anyone try to avoid you when you were in the White House? Did you ever experience anything like that?
Well, fortunately not. But when that happens, I've seen it happen before to members of the White House staff. And when you get isolated like that, especially if the president is starting to distance himself from you, that's good reason to start dusting off your resume. I mean, Steve Bannon is an ideologue, and Donald Trump is a pragmatist. I mean, Donald Trump is a pragmatist, a practical guy, and Donald Trump is not going to get rid of his son-in-law. He's going to listen to what his son-in-law has to say. I said this last week. So in the battle between Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner is going to win every time, and especially because of the fact that Donald Trump is a practical guy and not an ideologue.
Joe, Rick, Zerlina, stay with me. Next, could we see a woman run for president in 2020 on the Republican ticket? Well, the early buzz, that's coming up next.
You're gonna be hanging